You're watching Primetime on RT. Let's move on to another story now. A Moscow court has stated that a century-long ban on gay pride parades in the capital was illegal. Last year, Russian LGBT activists applied for permission to hold gay pride parades in the capital to the year hang on, I need help here. 2112.
It was that far ahead into the future. That's the problem.
It's incredible.
Yeah, the request was rejected, but activists are ready to pursue their case. Primetime's Peter Oliver joins us now. He has more on this very unusual story. Peter, does this really mean that we're not going to see any pride parades until the next century? OK, I thought that was a rather puzzled look from Peter, and I think that's because he couldn't hear us. Yeah, that explains everything. OK, we'll try and get back to Peter in a short while, but we'll push on with more news for you.
I think Peter can hear us. Let's ask him again. Peter?
Peter, good evening. Can you hear us? OK,
hello.
Lovely. We will
yes,
carry on
I can.
then.
I can hear you now.
Excellent. All right, I was just asking you, is this really how it looks? There's not going to be no gay pride parades for, what, another century?
Well, for this particular bid to host gay pride parades, yes, it means that the ruling from this court says that a parade can't be held for another 100 years. In reality, though, different groups can put forward another type of bid to hold a similar type of protest, and they would be dealt with on a case-by-case situation. So in terms of this particular bid that was to host 100 gay pride parades here in Moscow, that has been shut down by the Moscow court unless they can appeal that. That's the way it will stand at the moment, but other groups could, of course, come forward and try and hold their own demonstrations.
So do you think that would happen? What could possibly be the next step for LGBT activists?
Well, this particular organisation that has applied to hold these demonstrations here in Moscow, we're using a loophole in the law that allowed them to apply for 100 years worth of demonstrations. Now, as we've heard, that's been shot down. But what it has done is raised the issue again of gay rights here in Moscow. Now, what the group who are headed by Nikolai Alexeyev, who's a veteran gay rights campaigner here in Russia, what they've said is that, well, now they have a definite ruling from a Moscow city court. They can go to the European Court of Human Rights and say, we're being denied what we see as our human rights. Can you give us a ruling on this? They hope then that ruling will come in their favour, and they can go back to the courts here in Moscow and say, well, we feel we have grounds for an appeal. So not only does it give them a legal framework from which to build on, it also raises the issue again. Of course, it sounds quite shocking when you hear that for the next 100 years, certainly within our lifetimes, there'll be no gay right demonstrations, no gay pride demonstrations in Russia's capital. So, of course, they get the PR angle, they get their issue put across and discussed on shows like this and in newspapers, but also it gives them the ability to push for that legal framework from which to build on further.
And of course, this follows shortly after the anti-gay propaganda legislation that was passed and was adopted by several Russian regions. What kind of effect, if any, did the adoption of those laws have?
Well, in terms of here in Russia, we've seen a few people charged and convicted of apparently, the way the wording of the law is, distributing homosexual paraphernalia that can be seen by minors. Now, in St. Petersburg, which was one of the areas which adopted this law, Alexeyev himself, Nikolai Alexeyev, I was saying, one of the leaders of the gay rights movement here in Russia, he was arrested and charged 5,000 rubles. He paid that fine straight off, saying that he wanted to show his willingness to remain within the law and to adhere to the law. But internationally, of course, and outside of Russia, this is going to raise certainly more than a few eyebrows. We've seen gay rights campaigners from around the world here in Moscow before campaigning on behalf of Russian homosexual, lesbian, gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender groups, saying that they should be allowed to demonstrate. This, of course, is going to only increase the volume of their voices coming from outside. That these laws can be passed. I've heard them referred to as draconian laws that have been passed going around on the internet at the moment. So So it's certainly going to be something that isn't going away anytime soon. And I think if the court in Moscow feels that they've heard the end of it by making this ruling that there will be no parades for the next 100 years, then they're going to be sorely mistaken.
OK, thanks for the update. That's our correspondent Peter Oliver there.
Thank you.
Проблемы в области прав человека были одной из тем обсуждений на встрече Владимира Путина с премьер-министром Нидерландов Марком Рютте. Он обратил внимание на закон о запрете пропаганды гомосексуализма, принятый в некоторых регионах России. По мнению голландского премьера, это может ущемлять права сексуальных меньшинств. В свою очередь, президент России подчеркнул, что такие законы принимаются не на федеральном уровне, а на региональном и вместе с тем отражают настроение в обществе. Кроме того, Владимир Путин напомнил о том, что в Нидерландах есть партия, которая поддерживает педофилию.
Я с трудом себе представляю, чтобы какой-то суд в Москве позволил бы функционировать организации, которая пропагандирует педофилию. В Голландии это возможно. Есть такая организация. Я с трудом себе представляю, чтобы у нас сейчас вот заработала партия, которая представлена в парламенте, которая против того, чтобы женщины были в политике. Но здесь есть такая партия. И надо просто лучше слышать друг друга и уважать друг друга. Понимаете, ведь вот представьте себе, что если бы у нас такая организация появилась, которая пропагандирует педофилию, ну, слушайте, я думаю, что в некоторых регионах Российской Федерации люди бы из оружия взялись.
Thousands of people in Amsterdam turned out to demonstrate against a proposed anti-gay propaganda law in Russia as President Vladimir Putin visits the Dutch capital. The draft bill, which still needs a second reading and to be signed by Putin to become law, would see offenders handed a fine of over €12,000.
The proposed ban on so-called homosexual propaganda is just one step of what rights activists are calling a state-sponsored witch hunt. Just last year, a court in Moscow slapped a 100-year ban on the city's gay pride march. It's not gone down well with Amsterdam City Hall officials. They've taken the unusual step of protesting against a visiting head of state.
On Putin's arrival, rainbow flags were lowered to half-mast all around the Dutch capital.
We have a large gay community in Amsterdam, and our city, we want to make sure in our city that everybody can live the way they want, be whoever they are. And we want to make sure that everybody in the world knows that, also our partners.
Before his arrival, Putin spent the morning in Hanover with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who confronted him over Russia's crackdown on NGOs. Femin protesters there also attacked him on women's rights.
Russian police detained as many as 30 gay rights activists who took part in an unsanctioned rally in St. Petersburg. A few dozen activists had gathered at Palace Square in defiance of a ban. City authorities had turned down their request to hold a parade, so each participant demonstrated alone in a bid to avoid the protest being called a gathering. I came to Palace Square today to support the LGBT community and myself. I'm very tired of the discrimination and the thought that I'm not allowed to walk out and say that I feel bad about it. My country doesn't want to hear that I feel bad. It doesn't care. Police detained campaigners who unfurled rainbow flags or held placards, dragging them into a police bus. Homosexuality was considered a crime in Russia until 1993. And in 2013, Russia passed a law banning the spread of so-called gay propaganda.
Mensen, deep behind enemy lines op maandagmorgen. Een race tegen de klok, mensen. Dat is nu de situatie in de strijd tussen de New World Order, de Bilderbergers, de PP-elites en de complotdenkers, de Patriots, de Whiteheads, de Truthers, mensen. Je moet je zo voorstellen dat, laten we zeggen, onder de regenboog staat een grote pot. En van beide kanten zijn de tegenstanders aan het rennen naar die pot om wie er het eerst is. Die krijgt hem in handen en in die pot zit niet goud, maar een sleutel. En die sleutel geeft toegang tot de toekomst van de wereld. Wie die sleutel heeft, die kan de deur openen naar de toekomst van de wereld. Als wij die sleutel in handen krijgen, dan zal die toekomst er een zijn van voorspoed, geluk, liefde voor kinderen en vrijheid. Maar als de tegenstanders de sleutel in handen krijgen, dan wordt de toekomst er een van repressie, terreur, verkrachting, ondergang, epidemieën, dood, verderf, ziekte, armoede, honger, epidemieën. Dat is een beetje het verhaal, mensen.
Ребят, давайте немножко. Давайте полшага назад. Полшага назад. Давление граждан. А каких граждан можно узнать? Да, узнаем. Так, тихо. В сторону, граждане, в сторону отошли. Так, не навалимся на полицию. Назад 2 шага сделали. Предупреждаю здесь. Уберите его! Ну отойди ты, что ты? Молодец! И это мой плакат «Свободу Юрия Гаврикова». А может повернуть? Спасибо.
Putin officially bans same-sex marriage in Russia and stops transgender people adopting. Putin officially changed the country's constitution on a number of issues earlier this week, following a national referendum in which 77% of people in Russia voted in favor of the ban in July 2020. The new amendments mean same-sex couples will not be able to legally get married in Russia, because the country's constitution now says that marriage can only exist between a man and a woman. It also means that transgender members of the community will not be able to adopt. The anti-LGBT amendments are rooted in a belief in God within the country, in which many LGBTQ+ people choose to hide their true identity for their own safety. Homosexuality was first decriminalized in Russia in 1917, before being recriminalized in 1933 and then later legalized once more in 1993. However, homophobia remains rife in the country. One of the politicians who supported the recent constitution changes, Pyotr Tolstoy, described his home country as being a stronghold of traditionalism, telling the Associated Press that Russia would not repeat the mistakes that exist in the West. Elsewhere in the constitution change, Putin managed to slip in a reset on his own term limits as president, meaning he can now serve an extra 2 6-year terms, despite his current term being due to end in 2024.
Don't forget to subscribe 9+ International.
Ik doe mee met de demonstratie. Kijk, je bent welkom, maar... Nee, ik ben bang voor je. Ik kom uit Palestina, wij zijn bang voor iedereen. Christen, moslim, homo, iedereen. We gaan helemaal ver, wil je meelopen? Doe mee. Kom. Dan draaien we het toestel en doe je mee. Oké, top. Ik ben bang voor je.
This was the moment I discovered I was being expelled from Russia.
According to a specific law, I've been designated a threat to national security, and as such, I'm not allowed into the country.
Вам отказано во въезде в Российскую Федерацию бессрочно.
Pulled aside at passport control, I was told the FSB security service had banned me for life. I recorded the conversation.
Я вообще похожа, я журналист. Это опасная профессия.
Я знаю. мы, соответственно, всю информацию по вам уточним.
I was returning from Belarus, where I'd confronted Alexander Lukashenko on the mass repression and torture of peaceful protesters. His loyal supporters rounded on me in a coordinated attack.
Vladimir Putin's presenting this as just another working visit.
I've reported from Russia for 2 decades, the whole span of Vladimir Putin's presidency.
Russian people.
There have been highs, like the World Cup, but I've also charted the slow erosion of freedoms here, the crackdown on dissent. A year ago, the government put me on short-term visas. Then I became the news. As state television announced, I had to leave. After tense negotiations, I had been allowed to enter Russia.
They let me in, for now.
But only to pack. I was then told my visa wouldn't be renewed. Supposedly what happened to a Russian reporter in London, though that was 2 years ago.
When I was called in here to the Foreign Ministry, they kept insisting that my expulsion was nothing personal. They talked about it as a reciprocal move. But they refused to even engage with the fact that I've been labelled a national security threat. They said that was just a technical moment. But at a time when Russia is increasingly seeing enemies all around, it really feels like I've now been added to the list.
It's happening as the pressure on Russian journalists who don't toe the Kremlin line is intensifying. Dozh TV has just been added to a growing blacklist of media labelled foreign agents for getting funds from abroad.
The status of foreign agents means that we, Dozh, we are enemies of the state. The pretending of being democracy is over. It is very bad, and it could become much worse anytime.
Ready? So I'm leaving a country I first came to as the Soviet Union fell apart, when free speech, all freedoms, were new and precious. It feels like today's Russia is moving in reverse. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Ну, что ты греху такую, скажи?